Have any of y'all ever eaten at the Palmetto Pig?
Yes.
I was just over there. If I fall asleep, I had a big dinner. But I'm over there, and a guy in front of me's got 2 big plates of food. And I'm like, you're not going to live very long eating like that. He looked at me and he said, well, my granddad lived to be 105. And I said, well, your granddad lived to be 105 eating like that. He said, nope. He lived to be 105 by minding his own business. The moral of that story is, we do a lot better if our government were minding its own business. I don't think the government needs to be involved in every little bit of our lives. I don't think government needs to be involved in our businesses. But for goodness sakes, the government does not need to be collecting all of our phone records. That's insane. It's none of the government's damn business. Some people don't get this, though. They say, well, how are we going to catch terrorists? I told the governor of New Jersey how you catch them. You use the 4th Amendment. You use the Constitution. Doesn't mean we don't look at any records. It just means we don't indiscriminately look at all of your records. We've had since the beginning of the Republic the ability to look at people's records for whom we have suspicion. But the 4th Amendment says you have to name that person. You have to present the suspicion to an independent judge who signs a warrant. And it's not that hard to get a warrant. In fact, as much as I'm for privacy, if you call me at 3 in the morning and say, so-and-so, came from Chechnya, went back to Chechnya, the Russians have tipped us off they might be a bomber. Remember the Boston bombers? I'm going to say yes, look at their records. But if you ask me, can I look at everybody's records in Boston? I'm going to say no, because that's a generalized warrant. In fact, that's what we fought the American Revolution over. We've lost some of that knowledge. People say, oh no, we fought for the Second Amendment. Well, we kind of did, but back then no one could conceive of any government taking your guns away. But they could conceive of a government that came in your house with a generalized warrants. Back in those days, they called it a writ of assistance. And the British government and the British soldiers were writing the warrants. No judge was involved. And they were indiscriminately going in any of the houses to check your papers to see if you paid the stamp tax. So yes, our founding fathers were concerned about privacy. They were worried about people making illegal searches. And you say, well, how would it work? Your local police obey the 4th Amendment every day. If there's someone accused of rape in Columbia tonight at 3 in the morning, the police will go to the house. If the neighbors say we saw him go in there 3 hours ago, they will still stand there on the sidewalk and they will dial a judge and they will ask the judge for permission. That's what a warrant is. Permission, not from the police. So you don't trust the police? Well, sure, I trust the police, but it's a check and a balance to make sure that no bias enters into it, or to make sure accidentally the policeman is not someone who dislikes certain people, or maybe that's his residence and a girlfriend or ex-wife lives there. It's to have these checks and balances. That's why a judge gets involved. But the judge almost always says yes. So the 4th Amendment can work. But if you give up on the 4th Amendment, you know what disappoints me about it? Is I know people who fought in the wars in the last 15 years. I know one gentleman lost both legs and an arm. And when I asked him, what did you fight for? He said, the Constitution. That was my oath. And the Bill of Rights. And I said, well, wouldn't it be sad if when he came home, after giving so much for his country, if we gave up on the 4th Amendment while he was gone? And all of the other candidates are so careless with this. Jeb Bush says, oh, it's the best thing President Obama's doing. Christie would hug the president again if he could find him, I mean, the thing is that there are Republicans salivating over letting the president do more. It's the same way in Congress. There's a few of us, Congress Mulvaney and others, that are fighting for your right to be left alone and believe that you do have a right to privacy, and also believe that if you're going to defend the Second Amendment, you got to defend the 4th Amendment. I don't know about you, but I don't like hypocrisy. Hypocrisy rubs me the wrong way. And when I see someone like Jeb Bush, who admits he smoked pot in high school, I say, I don't care, big deal, except for the fact that he's still for putting people in jail for what he did in high school.
Exactly.
And I would change all of that. I would change the war on drugs because I think, frankly, look at the last several presidents. Clinton, I know he says he didn't inhale, but Let's just say, for argument's sake, let's count Clinton, George W. Bush, this president. It's like, do they really want to put people in jail for something they did? I'm not saying it's good. In fact, I would advise you not to do any of those things. But I would say that if someone makes a mistake, they deserve a second chance. I would also say that the war on drugs, and I've learned more of this in the last couple of years. I was always more leaving the individual alone. The war on drugs had gone too far. But I've read several books and looked at the statistics, and I've learned that the people in jail are primarily black or brown for drugs. 3 out of 4 people in jail for nonviolent crime are black or brown. And you say, well, what are you saying? Everything's about race? Well, no one selected them. Often they're in cities where the police and the mayor are black. So it's not a real racist thing, but it's a true thing. I think 3 out of 4 people are black or brown. You say, well, why is that happening? Well, because crime tends to be where people live closer together. So that means big cities. There happen to be more crime where there's poverty. And it just so happens there are more Hispanics and African Americans in those sections of town. So what happens is, if you look at the surveys, white kids and black kids are smoking pot at about the same amount, same rate. But when you look at it, black kids are like 12% of the public, and white kids are 80%. And then you look at the prisons, and it's like 75% black. How did that happen? The police just aren't going into the suburbs because there just isn't as much crime there. So it's not intentional, it's inadvertent, but it's real. And so people say, well, how's the Republican Party ever going to get any new people to consider them? Well, maybe we could quit putting everybody in jail for marijuana. Would be a start. Maybe we could acknowledge that in order to have a just system, we ought to reconsider what we're doing with the marijuana laws. The arrest, 15-to-1 black people to 1 white is the arrest rate in Chicago. That's out of control. Maybe if we were all of a sudden the party that wasn't hypocritical about it, saying, oh yeah, I smoked pot in high school and I went to Andover. It just turns out at a rich prep school in the Northeast, the police don't show up. Admit that. And admit that it's not fair for some kid who grew up on the south side of Chicago or some kid who grew up in Detroit to have a double standard. I think all of a sudden, you know what? Maybe more people would look to us. I think also that we ought to be the party that says, you know what? We've got a plan for poverty. We've got a plan for unemployment. What we're doing is not working. There's been a war on poverty since the early 60s. The only thing that's happened is we've got more poverty and more joblessness. If you look at African American unemployment, black male unemployment between the ages of 20 and 25 in Baltimore, it's 37%. It's an absolute disaster. It's worse than the Great Depression. Who runs Baltimore? Democrats. Who's run Baltimore for 50 years? Democrats. Maybe we need to rethink the ideas of how we fix the country. What is the Democrat idea for poverty? Send me your money and I'll give you some of it back. All right? So you're supposed to send your money to Washington and then you'll get some back in a poverty program. But then you have to choose who you give it to. You say, okay, we're going to create businesses in Baltimore. So Democrats say, send me your money and I'm going to give $1 million back to a business person in Baltimore. Here's the problem. About 50% of businesses don't make it. And then the other problem that enters into it is if you give money to government and you ask for it back, who do you think they give it to? They give it to the people who gave them money, the contributors. That's why it's a crony-based system. So you remember Solyndra, that big solar panel fiasco where the government lost $500 million of your money? The guy was a billionaire. Why would you give a donation? Why would you give government money and a loan to a billionaire? Because he was a big donor of President Obama's. Now, do Republicans do it? Probably too, true. But you shouldn't have government in the business of passing the money out. So how would you fix poverty? Don't take it to Washington and get some back to the area of poverty. Leave it there. So I have a plan to leave dramatic amounts in our cities. I would leave over $1 billion in Detroit over 10 years. I just would never send it to Washington. How do you do that? You lower the taxes to almost zero. You say, well, how do they provide for their streets and their jails and things like that? That's local taxes. The federal taxes go for other things. And right now, business is so bad in Detroit and Chicago that not a lot of money's going, but there's enough that if you cut the taxes to almost zero, maybe people will move to Detroit. Maybe people will move into the south side of Chicago. What else would I do for our cities? I'd give people choice on where they go to school. Many of you went to good public schools. I went to public school. I had calculus and physics and chemistry too and biology too. I had a great public school. I had anatomy and physiology in high school. But not everybody gets that. In some of our cities, over 50% of the students are dropping out of our schools. So you know what I'd do? I'd give every kid in America the choice to go where they want. So if you live in a crummy neighborhood or a neighborhood that's wrought with violence and drugs and your school sucks, I'd let you go to the suburbs. If your mom or dad will drive you or the bus will take you, if you can go to the suburbs, I'd let you go to any school. It'd be called a voucher. Anybody could have one. They can go anywhere they want. You know what? If we had these ideas, all of a sudden people might be saying, wow, I never thought I could be a Republican. I never thought I could vote for a Republican. But what if Republicans are going to have a new policy on the war on drugs? What if Republicans are going to have a new policy on schools? What if Republicans are going to have a new policy on how we get rid of poverty? I think we also ought to have a little discussion about war. Our founding fathers did everything possible in the Constitution to make it hard to go to war. What's supposed to happen is, in order for war to be initiated, you have what's called a declaration of war, and the Constitution said that Congress has to do this. Now, we haven't done this in quite a while, and we did vote for the Iraq War, we did vote for the Afghanistan War, but under President Obama's duration, we haven't voted on any of them. And in fact, it was sort of one of the lies the president told the country. The president said when he ran, and this is one of the things I actually agreed with the president on, the president said that no president should unilaterally go to war without the consent of Congress. And that's a great statement because it basically restates the Constitution. In fact, our founding fathers, Madison, said that history demonstrates that the executive branch is most prone to go to war. Therefore, with studied care, the Constitution vested that power in the legislature. They took that power away from the presidency. They said you can't go to war without permission of the people, through the people's house, through Congress. We don't do it that way anymore. So what I would say, what about a Republican, what about somebody from any party who says that war should be the last resort, not the first resort? That when we go to war to win. We don't go to war with restraint. We don't go to war with one arm behind our back. We go to win and then we come home. So we give up on this foolish notion that we're going to create nations. I talked to a Navy SEAL a couple weeks ago, and he says, look, we can go anywhere, kill anyone, we'll do whatever you ask us, but the minute you tell us to plant our flag and create a nation like America, we just can't do it. They aren't like us in the Middle East. In fact, they don't like us in the Middle East, if you haven't noticed. On any side, the ones we give weapons to hate us. It's like, couldn't we just have a rule that says, let's don't give money or arms to people who hate us? I argued in the Foreign Relations Committee against arming the Islamic rebels in Syria. And you say, well, we wanted to arm the moderate ones to fight against Assad because he's terrible to his people. It's like, well, Assad is a bad guy. He gassed his people in all likelihood. If he were walking along the road today, I wouldn't feed him. All right? So he's a bad guy. But sometimes both sides of the war are bad. What's on the other side? Assad is the dictator in Syria. The other side is ISIS. Who do you want to give your money to? The guy who gassed his people or the people who are beheading Christians? Maybe you don't give money to either side. What did we do? We made the decision to arm the Islamic rebels against the Syrian government. The ambassador to Syria from our country, the American ambassador to Syria, came to our committee and he said, it's inevitable that the people we're giving these arms to will be allies of Al-Qaeda. It's like, excuse me, I thought that's who we were fighting. I thought that's who attacked us on 9/11. Why in the hell would we be giving arms to people allied with Al-Qaeda? And they said, well, it's inevitable. That's what we're doing. That's our strategy. David Petraeus, this famous general, he's still saying the same thing. We need to arm the allies of Al-Qaeda. Well, these are the people who became ISIS. That's foolish. We gave weapons to one group. I can't pronounce the name of the group anymore, but we gave them anti-tank weapons. You know what they said they'd do with them? After they're done with Assad, they'd take back the Golan Heights from Israel. Well, Israel's an ally of ours. Why would we be giving weapons to countries that hate us and hate Israel as well? It makes no sense. They asked me in the first debate, they said, what are you going to do about ISIS? And I said, well, maybe we start by not arming them. When we gave they have $1 billion of our Humvees. They have $1 billion of our cash. They pay their soldiers with our money that they confiscated. They have anti-tank weapons. They have our tanks, for goodness sakes. We've got to learn that sometimes there is no answer over there. Maybe just not being involved on either side might be the best thing. In Yemen right now, people are freaking out in Washington. They so much want to get involved in a war in Yemen. They say, well, Iran is funding the Houthi rebels. It's like, well, Saudi Arabia is funding the other side. Who are the Houthi rebels fighting? The Iranian-backed rebels? They're fighting Al-Qaeda. I'm like, maybe we should just buy popcorn. Iran's killing Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda's killing Iran. What role do we have in that war? When I look at war, and when I look at whether or not we should be at war, I think of you. It's people your age. The first time I went to Walter Reed, I have a 22-year-old son, and the first time I went in there, I saw a kid, and he was 18 or 19, and he looked 15, and he had lost his leg in the war, and I was like, my goodness, he was a little kid. And people say, well, yes, they're brave, and they'll fight for us. Absolutely right. But you know what? It's the responsibility of people my age, who are going to send people your age to war, to think twice about it. It's not a game. And we ought to think about it. If you haven't noticed, I'm a different kind of Republican, all right? I think it's going to take a different kind of Republican. Sometimes in a state like South Carolina, it's easy to get lulled to sleep because Republicans are winning everything in South Carolina. And the truth of the matter is, any of the 54, 64, 74 candidates on the Republican side could probably win in South Carolina for the nominee. But very few, if any of them, can win Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Why are we not winning any of those states anymore? Primarily because we get almost no African American vote. We win all the white vote. You look at those states and you look where the white people are predominant, we win all of those, every county. But then we get clobbered in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Chicago. Why? Because people who are African American think, I'm not voting Republican, they don't care about me. So we got to show up and we got to say what we do care. We care about fixing the criminal justice system. We care about the Fourth Amendment, people coming into your house. We care about poverty and joblessness. And we're going to do something different than the Democrats because there's objective proof it hasn't worked. Democrats have been trying the same program for 60 years to pass out stuff to you and it doesn't work. So there are answers. There are different answers than you've been hearing from either side. There are people who say, you know what, let's try something simple in Washington. Let's only spend what comes in. If you say that in Washington, they will freak out. Steam will come out of their ears. Their head will lift off. If you say something like spend only what comes in. Everybody else does it. Every American family has to spend what comes in, but in Washington we haven't done it in years. We spend about $3.8 trillion and we bring in $3 trillion. For goodness sakes, couldn't we live on $3 trillion? I mean, it's insane that we can't just live on $3 trillion, but it's both sides. And this is what you're going to learn. If you don't know whether you're Republican or Democrat yet, you think you're independent or unsure, you're going to learn that there's an unholy alliance up there. The right wants to spend everything they can on the military and they don't care about any fiscal limits. Many on the right. On the left, they want to spend everything on welfare and no limits. You know what happens? They get together and both go up. We're in the process of this right now. In the next week or two, they're going to bust the caps and spending is going to rise for everything. The ultimate compromise that will happen sometime before the end of the year is all spending will go up. What does that mean to you? You know, our deficit is, our debt is now about $18 trillion, a little more. That's bigger than the entire economy. You say, I don't know what that means. What's $1 trillion? What it means to you is about 1 million jobs a year that aren't being created. That burden of debt is a drag on the economy. So there's 1 million jobs not being created. And to your parents, what does it mean? You may still be living in their basement when you're 26 or 28 years old. Want the economy to grow? You got to understand one fundamental thing. Where are jobs created? Are jobs created by the federal government or by the general public? If you want more jobs in the general public, more jobs in the private sector, you're going to leave more money there. So you got to get away from all this crap that comes from Democrats who say, oh, well, the tax cuts will just go to rich people. Rich people pay more in taxes, okay? Rich people employ you. And so if you say, well, I want the tax cut to only go to poor people, there'll be no tax cut. And there'll be no help for the economy because poor people don't pay much of the taxes, percentage-wise. If you cut all the taxes 10%, someone who pays $1 million in taxes is going to have a bigger tax cut than someone who pays $100 in taxes. That's math. But the thing is we've got to get over that and not be envious of our neighbor. You got to go out and beat the one who makes $1 million. You can do anything. I mean, it is amazing the opportunities that we have open to us in our country. We are the greatest and richest country in the history of man. We give away more money than the gross domestic product of 90% of the world. nothing but greatness from this country, but you're letting your government get too big and it's starting to squelch that. I want to be part of the generation that says, leave me alone, let me be free, let me create, and let me create the wealth of the nation that will fix a lot of our social problems. I hope you want to be part of that movement too. Thank you very much.